Well, hello! I've just had a birthday and my family bought me a present, which is this Mavic Air bundle. Now, I normally fly the sort of racing quad type things, but I thought this would be fantastic as a travelling quad, because when I travel with a wing or a quad, it's not just the wing or the quad, it's the controller, it's the goggles, it's the batteries, it's the charger, it's the backpack, it's everything. This is nice and small. So I thought I'll show you about it from my perspective as someone who's done a lot of flying before with the sort of things on the wall there, but not really anything with sort of that out-of-box GPS type fly. So I thought first we'd do the normal thing, we'd get out of the box and see what's in there. You get this bag, this smaller bag, and this box of bits. We'll start with the box of bits. It has in it a bunch of instructions and disclaimers and warranty information. It's also got the prop guards in it, which I probably won't be using. The big main bag, now this is the Fly More bundle, which comes with extra batteries and stuff like that. There's a box. So in the box we have some little USB adapters. I think this is from the main controller to the phone. Another USB, some battery converter thing, and something else in this bag. Okay, just examining this, these are spare little ends for the controller sticks. And in here we've got two spare sets of props. Also in this bag, the battery charger hub, two of the additional batteries, and the power adapter for the charger with a UK plug, because it was ordered from the UK. Lastly in the bag, slipped nice down the side, we have the little remote controller, which is all folded in and has the stickers on currently. And finally, in this little tiny bag, we have the little Mavic Air itself, which is, I've seen them before, but they're still an absolute marvel of engineering. I can't believe how much it folds up so little. It's still got stickers all over it and stuff to take off in order. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to unstick it in the right order, and I'm going to put the batteries onto charge. I'm going to download the app and I'm going to find out exactly what I have to do and how it all goes together. Now I should say also it's my birthday and I'm now 47, so I've been doing this since 2012 I think, so about 6 years without that no real previous RC experience. So if you're like over 40 and you think you're past the idea of learning something new, you're absolutely not. Just dive in there and get on with it and it'll all be fine. Now I know loads of people have already done sort of unboxings and setups on these, so I wasn't going to go into it too much, but this is kind of what I really love about it. The fact it goes into this little bag, and then it's just so easy to set up. You take these bits out, you fold those bits out, and it's got these little legs here, and you've got a little gimbal protector here, and you turn it on by pressing this button twice. You press it once, you get the battery indicator. This isn't charging at the moment. The one thing to note though is the legs are very close to the ground, especially at the back, so you have to be quite careful on your landing sites. Meanwhile, the controller, which doesn't have its own bag, sadly, it's a bit of a shame. You've got the little sticks in here that you just screw in. Fold out these antennas like so, and then your phone connects in here. And then you're ready to turn on. This is, again, it will show it's how much it's charged, and you charge through here, and that's all good to go.
So obviously the first thing to do was to take it into the garden and just to make sure it all worked, and it did, and it felt super solid. When I look back at the footage, although it's just me in the garden, it essentially just looks like a camera on a tripod in the sky, which is really quite spooky. So after that I took it to the field, which is a pretty boring place for taking video for this sort of quad, but I wanted to try out just a few of the sort of what I'd call the silly features, little sort of tricks in flight modes. So you've got one called the droney, which you press a button, it essentially flies backwards, keeping you in shot. The boomerang, which I kind of like, it sort of goes around in a kind of elliptical arc around you. And the asteroid, which is really silly but really quite, it creates quite an effect. So this was all back in May when I got it, and it's nearly the end of October now. So what exactly have I been up to? Well, I wanted to do, you know, a reasonable amount of flying with it before I came back and decided what I thought about it. But I actually started using it straight away, because although I thought, you know, this is something I could take away with my family, and you know, it's easy to travel when you go on holiday. I also thought it could help with some of the other videos I do. So I got it just in time for a review on the Torval Adventure Backpack, which you may have watched or may want to watch. So what I tried to do in there is I had a bunch of shots where I was walking around, and I really tried to mix in the shots from the Mavic with regular tripod shots using a GoPro. So the idea was here that you didn't necessarily think it was a drone shot, just part of the narrative. But it gave me a chance to mess around with a few more of the features. Again, I did the sort of it's a tripod in the sky sort of thing, where I just literally walked past myself. I did other things where I walked whilst moving the camera around or moving the quad around itself. And then I used some of the follow me features, is where you just literally draw a little box around yourself and say follow me. And I found you can actually use this in combination with the controller, which will give you a slightly different move than you might expect. So for example, I could say follow me, and then when I moved one of the sticks it would come around in quite a graceful arc. And you could obviously do this while you were walking and not having to look at the control at all, which was quite nice. And I'm really impressed with the picture, given that when you look at the quad, it's really small, so often looks like it's being chucked around in the air quite a lot, to the point where you're like, how is that so smooth? It really is the gimbal that's doing all the magic. Now, I started off using 4K, but I really didn't feel I was getting much out of it. I don't do much of my footage in 4K, so it took up an awful lot more space. And when I compared it with the 1080p 60 frames per second footage I was getting, I wasn't seeing that much of an improvement from my point of view in the monitor I have, so I've stuck to 1080p 60. Now, one mistake that I made coming from the normal quads I fly is when I started flying the Mavic, what I tended to do is turn on the recording, take off, come back, land and turn it off, just like I would if I was using a GoPro. Of course you don't need to do that, it's not necessary at all. You just press the button to take a photo when you want, or you press the button to stop video when you want. Now, the actual full quality video is recorded to the SD card in the quad, but what you can do is set up so the video is also recorded on your phone via this thing called the cache in the DJI app. There's some settings around to configure it, but it's a 720p recording of your raw flight, and it actually looks fantastic when you review it back on the phone. Here's a little bit of footage from it, and you can see it. I think it actually stands up pretty well just on itself, and it's much more convenient than trying to transfer footage from your quad over to the phone just to review it. You had some other bits on the phone as well. Occasionally it would just do things like create little bits of footage for me for no apparent reason. It's just like, hey, I've created this thing, and it put music on there for me, and it did some speed ramps, and like, that's weird, I didn't ask it to. What you also get on the phone is you can play back basically the telemetry from the flight, so it will plot your position on a map, it will show you your speed, your connection with the controller, your stick inputs, any messages coming back on what mode it was in. This is all pretty interesting stuff. So, like my intention, over time we've gone away for the odd weekend or two out for a walk, and I've taken the Mavic along because it takes up no space. That little bag for the Mavic itself and the controller is almost flat, and really just hadn't explored the area. And I've been able to fly out in some nice deserted and quite lovely places, and able to really sort of push what I can do on the radio itself. Quite surprised to find I could get to 1.5 kilometers in this section here, although I do notice that the range is very dependent on the environment you're in. So in other places I've sort of got to 600, 700 meters and it started complaining. On here in the middle of nowhere land, it's really good. But I kind of like this sort of footage I get here. It's kind of this sort of slow flying and just letting the sort of smooth images float on past you. You do really notice though that if you make just a little correction which is slightly too big, it pulls you back out of that sort of nice flowy footage into like, oh, we're back in a quad. You have to be very careful to make sure every movement you do is smooth and not at all out of speed with the rest of it. And on that subject, I've messed around with its sports mode, and you know, it's pretty fast. You can hurtle around nicely. But I find sometimes the footage seems a little bit jerky, especially when you sort of get going. It's like the gimbal, it doesn't quite work itself out straight away. It's a little bit quick for it. It's okay for getting to places quickly, but I don't sort of feel the need with this sort of quad. This sort of quad seems to me about, you know, just getting the image you want, not the fact you're getting there or back particularly fast. I mean, if you were chasing something along, it'd be more useful, I guess. I've also played with this mode called Fpv Mode, and you've got 2 spare buttons on the remote, one of which I use to display a map, the other I've used for this Fpv mode, and it's quite an interesting mode and it might have some use. Basically, the camera banks with the quad, that the rest of the gimbal still smooths out, but you get this nice sort of, it feels like a really smooth wing flight, so you're getting these lovely banked turns, which, you know, might come in handy for certain type of footage if you're trying to sort of actually show you are flying, and sort of it's more an emulation of like a bird or a plane flying, I guess. So let's talk about the sensors. This is much touted as being crash proof, and I have to say I haven't tried to fly into anything. I found that's like a little bit crazy. And I often notice if I'm just taking off in a very limited space, like in my back garden, basically it's beeping all the way along, because it's basically saying there's something in front of me, there's something behind me, and you're quite close to the ground. So it's beeping all over, sort of trapping me inside. Obviously you can turn it off, but from my point of view, you know, in my normal situation, I'm up high enough and it's not really a problem to me. It's only if you're going to be in a very limited space you might need to turn it off. So, like I said, I didn't ever try and crash into something, but I have seen it in action. If you saw my recent build of an e-skateboard, I took Sophie with me to film me, and I didn't give her any instructions at all beforehand. I took off in the Mavic. I gave her the controller and I said to her, just draw a box around me with your fingers and press go. And that was all fine. And I said to her, look, if it goes crazy, just press this button and it will come back and it will be good. And that was it. So I was going along in the skateboard, and when I turned this corner, what I expected the Mavic to do is stay on its own side. It was kind of on the inside of me. But what it did, it crossed over behind me. I don't know why it did this. Perhaps it's sort of, its algorithm is like, this is more cinematic if I cross over. But this put it into a line of a tree. And you can see me looking up, looking a little bit worried. But rather than stop, I was like, it should be okay. And there you see the Mavic hit the brakes, come to a stop. At this point, it lost track of me. So what it did, it just sat in the air, waiting there. Pretty good, I thought. It also avoided a bit of tree here. I was a little bit worried when I watched this back, because I thought, wow, that is getting really close. It's almost like it kind of thought about it and then just said, yeah, you know, I'll go for it anyway. But I like the way it half lost me but could see me, and then sort of caught up with me as I was speeding away, and it knew to speed up and try and get me back. So the other thing I did note about the Mavic Air is the legs are quite short, so you need very short grass for the props not to hit something. So one thing I wanted to think, if I needed to, could I land it in my hand or take off from my hand? You know, most of the time if you had just like a small landing mat or a small area, you can put it down very accurately. But I thought I'd actually have a go at this. And I've seen other people do it, and they tend to sort of hover it there and then pull it out of the air and flip it over, and it gets really angry and speeds the props up before it sort of gives up. So what I did, I just put my hand out flat and I just said do a takeoff, and it was fine. And landing, I did the same thing. All I did was make sure my hand was nice and level and steady. As you come over the top of your hand, the sensor obviously just beeps, but if you just keep your stick downwards, basically it gets the message that you want to land and will just descend into your hand. And like I say, you keep your hand nice and steady and level, you won't have a problem. Of course, DJI absolutely say don't do this. This is not an option for hand landing, and it's not something I necessarily recommend. I just wanted to see if I could do it if I was stuck. And yeah, it's not a problem. So I've not really talked about the app interface. So here on screen is a capture I did from my phone. I have to say it's a pretty slick interface. No doubt there's some latency going on here, but it's not something I really noticed because obviously we're not racing around at 100 miles an hour like we would be doing on a race quad. And I have to say the image is fairly amazing considering this is just Wi-Fi. And as I say, the range has been pretty good. It got to 1.5 kilometers, in other places around 600 meters. Most of the time with this sort of quad, I think I'm probably going to be within about 500 meters of myself. I've never had an issue with it in that length. It's always been absolutely fine. So everything you need here is completely on screen, and you can easily tap to get a map, which, as I mentioned, I put on one of my user-defined buttons. And you just got everything there you need. You can see how to get home, your height, your battery. It even warns you about if you've got enough battery to get back and how long you've got. I was pretty worried at first that using a phone, the sun can easily reflect on it. I wouldn't be able to see. I've got an iPhone 6s at the moment, and this has held up pretty well in the light. It seems like when you put it in landscape mode, it's actually quite bright there. When the sun's really bright, it's just a case of me of turning so the sun's behind me and I can give it a little bit of shade so I can see what I'm doing better. So I've actually come to trust this very quickly. I've gone ahead and flown it over completely non-rescuable conditions, out over water, over thick and deep forest. You know, I've obviously kept an eye on the battery, but I've flown it completely out of range and just let RTH do its thing, and it's just come back so accurately every time. Again, I wouldn't recommend you ever sort of deliberately flew something out of range just to see if it would come back. I did some tests beforehand, but it's really great to know that you can trust it. So flying the Mavic Air is obviously very, very different to any sort of race quad. I kind of think of it as what one of my friends described it as before. It's not so much flying, it's kind of pushing. He described it as pushing a giant eyeball around the sky. It's like you're really just pushing a camera around. You don't need to think of it in terms of quad controls. It's really just some camera controls. But it does come with its own little challenges. Not in the flying part, obviously that is ridiculously simple. But if you want nice footage, then there's some effort in getting things just the right amount of smooth. As I said before, you have to be really careful that in your maneuvers that you don't move or yaw the camera just that little bit too fast. That just pulls you back into thinking this is coming from a quad. You need smoothness all around. And experienced flyers will be able to do this sort of thing. I mean, this is where some of those flight modes like the boomerang and the droney, these are simple maneuvers for anybody who's used to it, and perhaps you can do it smoother than the quad can do it itself. But for other people, you know, there's help at hand there. But I kind of like the fact that if you know how to fly a regular quad, then you can get a lot out of this in terms of being able to get your footage exactly how you want it to. So in conclusion, what is the Mavic Air like? It is an impressive little package. I do love the fact that I just need to take this tiny foldable quad and a controller with me, because, you know, I always have my phone with me. And so it's done really well on taking it with me on family trips, and I can get, you know, a good 15 minutes of flight out of it. So sometimes I don't even need the second and third battery. That said, this is not a fun fly. It's not something I'd ever want to fly in the same place twice. You don't just go out and say, oh, I'll just fly it around, because it's not flying it, it's just moving a camera around. It's a tool for taking photos and videos which just happens to fly. So there's no real fun in flying for the sake of it. Instead, what it's really nice to do is take it up in the air and explore new areas to see what's out there, get some video perhaps of yourself and some selfies and some nice photos along the way. So do I recommend it? Yes, absolutely, as a quad to take photos and video, but not if you want to fly for fun. Of course, that said, the Mavic Air is just one of the quads in DJI's range. I like it because the dimensions work really nice for me, but there's better video available from the new Mavic Pro 2s and the Phantom 4 and more range as well. But of course, that's a whole new can of worms to open, and it really depends where you're coming from and what you want. Anyway, that's my Mavic Air, and no doubt you probably be seeing some more footage from it from upcoming videos. But perhaps if I do it right, you may not actually notice that it was the Mavic filming at all. Anyway, I do hope that video is useful, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.